Today we're going to make the Alexis slipper sock. So what you want to do is determine your loom size first. Don't worry about the size of your foot lengthwise. We're concerned with the width of your foot. So if you have an average size foot, you'll want to go with the 40 pegs. You can do 36, but it could become a little snug, especially if you're using the bulky yarn. A small narrow foot, 36 pegs is perfect. And for wide extra large foot, you'll want to go with 44 pegs. So to get started, we'll want to cast on, and to do that we want to take the end of our starting yarn and just drop it into the center of our loom. Just drop it right into the center. Then we want to reach underneath our loom, grab that tail, bring it around and anchor it down. If you don't have an anchoring peg, then you'll just want to leave it underneath the loom. If you knit from the left to the right, then you'll want to put your knitting or your yarn between what is your first and your last peg. I like to knit right to left, so this is my last peg and this is my first. So my yarn will go between these two pegs. So the yarn coming up between your first and last peg, you want to wrap the last peg. So basically just put the yarn around the front of it. Go behind the first or the last peg, around the front of the first peg. Go behind the first peg, around the front of the second to last peg. Behind the second to last peg, around the front of the second peg. Around the front, around the front. So just keep going back and forth around the fronts of the opposite pegs on either side of the loom. Obviously these little areas at the front, at the middles of the pegs for the loom, is where it gets a little bit tricky. I'll turn this around. And then around the middle one, and there are no more pegs, so this yarn is just going to float in front of that middle peg. When we knit it, we're going to knit it off. So just like that. Now that will help to anchor that down. We're going to put some stitch markers around these end loops so that when we go to close the toe up, we can easily find them. Just go into the loops as deep as I can get and then close it up. Go around to the front and do the same thing here. And on the front, it might be easier to go in this way because every time I do this I always think I should do that and I don't. But that way it'll be easier for me to take them off the loops. So just like that. We already knit our first peg, so we want to just continue going back. We want to knit around the loom one time back to our middle peg, not our first one, but back to the middle one. And now we've knit back to our middle peg. We haven't knit the middle peg yet, so that yarn is still just having been floated in front and knit here. And we're going to knit this, and this is where we're going to start our German short rows. So we'll go ahead and knit that off. And when you knit it, you want to make sure that it's a nice, not too loopy, but a nice gentle stitch. You don't want a tight stitch. And then to German short row, you bring that working yarn around the side and you just pull it gently towards the other side. You can see it looks like there are a couple of loops now on this peg, and there's a little knot here in front of it. That's your first short rowed peg. And now we'll just follow the direction of the yarn, just taking us back the opposite direction that we came in. So we're going to go ahead and knit around to our first peg. So we're knitting, not speaking well, but knitting between our first and middle pegs. We're going to go back and forth, short rowing and decreasing by one peg on each side as we go. So here we are to the first peg. We're going to knit it as usual. But instead of like a regular slip stitch, continuing this way, we're going to bring that working yarn to the opposite side. And then we're going to bring it in front of the peg, pulling gently until we see the two strands. And we've got a little knot. And then we're going to knit back to our middle peg. And this will be forming the toe for our sock. Here's our first short rowed peg on this side, the middle peg. So we're going to short row the next one over. Just knit it over, bring it around the side, and pull. Then we'll go back to the other side. And we'll short row the second peg. And we'll continue to do this until we have the correct number of pegs short rowed on each side. Here you can see we've short rowed this peg. This is our last one to do. So we'll stitch over. I like to pull that loop back a little bit. It helps to loosen this stitch up. Bring it to the side and short row. And now we have 6 short rows on each side, and if you look down at the loom, you can see that between the stitches on the short rowed pegs, you have these little openings, these little V spaces. Those pegs have been properly short rowed. And on this side you see that as well. You can see how it looks different than this space here. The spaces between the short rowed pegs look different. We're going to knit back and we're going to knit over and slip stitch the last short row on this side. So we're going to begin to increase our toe. Here's that short rowed peg. When you knit over a short row, you can definitely feel the difference. Just take your time, ease that stitch over and down. Now that's slipped, we'll come back around this way, bringing our yarn from the back of that peg, like you would do when you normally turn. We're back to our last one here. So we're going to knit over, slip stitch that, and then knit back to the other side. And we'll pick up the next short row. So we're going to continue back and forth between these short rowed pegs. And every row we're going to pick up a short row on each side. And here's our first peg with a German short row and our second one. So I'm going to go ahead and knit this one off, and that leaves me with the first peg and the middle peg with the German short rows on them. Those are the last ones. So I'm going to go ahead and knit back just like I would if I were going back to pick up that last one. But instead of knitting that off and turning, I'm going to just continue around the loom and pick up both of those German short rows in this round. So I'm coming up to the middle peg that has the last German short row on this side. Go ahead and knit that off. And instead of turning and working my way back to the first, I'll just go ahead and keep on knitting towards the first peg. Now this side of the loom has been left alone for a while we've made the toe, and it is very loosey-goosey. Lots of loose loops down in here, and you'll notice the difference as you start getting into the middle of these pegs. You'll have all of these loose stitches. You want to be very careful not to make your knitting too tight. So you want to just go over these slowly and gently, and you can see that they might pop off. So what I like to do is when I get to the really loose ones, I'll just put a finger or my thumb over the peg next to the one I'm knitting. Oops, I have to put it in front there. And that will help hold those stitches down, even though they're extremely loose and floppy. This will get better as you knit a few rows in, but for right now you just want to take your time. Try not to make your stitches too tight, so keeping those nice gentle stitches, and making sure that when you knit over you don't pop anything off of the pegs next to the one you're knitting. And now we're coming up on our first peg that still has a German short row on it. And here's our first peg with the last German short row on it. We'll go ahead and knit that over and begin our next round of knitting. I finished knitting my 3 rounds after doing the toe, and now it's time to change color. So I'm going to leave myself a nice tail here to weave in. To add a new color, I like to just make a loop, leaving a tail to weave in. Just place that loop on the peg where I want the new color to start, and knit over. I take my tails and I wrap it around once, like I'm tying a knot. Wrap it around twice. Wrapping it twice helps it just to hold together. And then I'm just going to give it a little tug so that it's secure. And now I have my new color, and I'm ready to continue the sock. I just knit 1 round in this main color of the body of the sock. We've done 1 round of knit, and now we're going to start the wrapped section, our twisted knit section. So we're going to take the yarn and wrap it around the back, around the front, and around the back again to create our twisted knit stitches. We're going to do 1 round of twisted knit, or E-wrap is what it's known as. We finished E-wrapping, and now we're going to start our first stranded knit section or row, and we knit off. So we just go over the top of the new yarn, E-wrap 3, then we E-wrap with our contrasting color, so we bring our contrasting color underneath our main color, E-wrap that peg. Bring our main color over the contrasting color. E-wrap the next 3. Then E-wrap 1 with our contrasting color, and you're going to hold on to this stitch, pull it tight. Helps reduce the length of the floats. Bring our main color over the top of the contrasting color. E-wrap 3. Contrasting color under. Make sure that you don't get confused with the tail. And continue the pattern in this way. I finished the first round of stranded knitting, and before I continue on the second round, I'm going to just take this tail and pin it down. And to do that, I'm just going to place it over the top of my main color, coming off of this last peg. And then I'm just going to take the main color and knit the first stitch in the next round. That will be a little loose because it's the very first one. And then pull that snug. And that way that's pinned down for when we need to use it the next time. In the meantime, we'll just let it float back here. Untwist it, and then we'll knit this round. Something that I like to do on these contrast ones is I like to give them a little tug and then knit over. That helps to tighten up the floats. So inside the sock, you can see that we have our first round of stranded knitting. And we've just let this lay on the side while we've knit the rest of the rounds in our main color. And now we're going to bring it up. So we want to knit E-wrap 2 stitches. And then we want to reach underneath our main color and bring our contrasting color up. We want to do this gently. We don't want to tug on it and make that too tight. We just want to bring it up so that it just lays nicely against the inside of the knitting. Knit that peg. Bring our main color over the top. E-wrap 3 stitches. Bring our contrasting color up underneath. E-wrap 1. Main color over the top. E-wrap 3. Contrasting color underneath. We're coming up to the end of this round. And one thing I like to do to keep my yarn from getting tangled up is I keep my contrasting ball of yarn on this side and then my other yarn on this side. And as I work around, I just make sure that this is always kind of hanging out on this side of the loom and this is always over here. You can see that I've got all of this sock finished, and now I'd like to go ahead and close the toe. And to do that, you want to find the end where your tail is coming out, and you want to go to the opposite side. I want to go ahead and come over here. And this is where we'll start to close the toe. So I'm just going to carefully take the stitch marker off of the first few little loops there. Put it back on. So you can see I've just got these first little starting ones, and I want these to be tightened up just a bit. Put my needle underneath this first one to find out, just to make sure that this is the one that I want to use next. It is, so I'm going to go ahead and pull on that one. The next one in line will be this one. So I'll just kind of give that a little pull. Take that one off. And then the next one will be this one, coming up from the bottom. So go ahead and give that one a little tug. Probably remove all of these. This one's working out a little easier than the first one I did. We'll be coming from the top. Pull on that. Then from the bottom. I'm down to the last loop that needs tightened. So I'm going to go ahead and take that stitch marker off, and we'll tighten this last one up. Just pull this super long loop all the way out. Make sure that is snugged up, not super tight. You don't want to yank on it, you just want it to be nice. And then your cast on yarn, we just pull that out. And there we have our closed up toe. So I'll leave a tail to sew in. I'm going to step down into the sock. And pull that through. So now that tail is going to be down inside the sock and ready to sew in later. And there's our finished toe. Here's the row where we zipped it up. Here's the other side. One tip, if you want a more rounded toe, just do one less row of German short rows on the increase and decrease, and that will bring the toe out this way and round it off a little more. If you want more pointy toe, do more increases and decreases, or decreases and then increases. That's the way it goes. There's the toe. So on the toe, we knit 20 rounds, or 20 pegs, 20 stitches, and we did from the first peg to the 20th peg on this side of the loom. For the heel, I like to add 2 more. So if we went last peg to the second middle peg, this would be 20 stitches. But I'm going to use the same pegs that we used for the toe, and I'm going to make the heel on the opposite side. I'm doing this for a couple of reasons. The first reason is this will give me a little more room on the heel because it will give me 2 extra pegs to work with to build the heel up. Also, I prefer to have the zippered area on the bottom of the foot. It's not really noticeable when you zip up a toe like this. That little ridge is really negligible, and it usually falls under the pads of your toes, just below them, where you have the pads of your toes and then a little dip before the ball of your foot. So it's a good place to have it, and I just really like the way the toe folds up and the way it looks having that on the bottom. So you can put your heel and your toe wherever you want. If you want that zippered part on the top of your toes, you can go ahead and build your heel on this side of the loom. If you want a little roomier heel, then go ahead and knit from the last peg to the other, just one over from the middle. So that's how we're going to do this. So we've put our new color on. We have our working yarn ready to go. And this first peg for the heel, we're going to go ahead and short row it. So we've put it on, we've anchored it down, and now we're going to gently bring it back to the side, around the front. So the opposite of slip stitching. If we're slip stitching and working back, we would just bring it around the back and then to the front of the next one. But we're going to bring it around to the side, and then we're going to pull very gently. That brings this loop to the front, so it looks like there's 2 strands now in front. It's going to make a little bump here in front of the peg. So just like the toe, we're going to go ahead and knit over to our middle peg that we used when we made the toe. And I've just left my main sock colors still attached, so you just want to kind of move those to the side so they're out of the way. Don't want to get all tangled up. And now we are to our middle peg that we started our toe on. I'm just going to knit it off, and instead of slipping and coming back this direction, we're going to go around the other side just like we did on the toe, and we're going to short row that peg. And now we're coming back to our first pegs. This is the one we short rowed first, so we're going to short row this next one. Knit it off, bring the yarn around to the side, short row it, and then work our way back to the middle. We're going to continue doing this for the number of times that we need to short row the pegs on each side, and then we'll do the increase. Now I just have this one last peg on this side to short row, and that finishes 7 pegs on each side that I have short rowed. So when I work back to this side of the loom, I'm going to knit off the last short row here. So now we're going to work on our increases, just like we did with the toe. It's exactly the same. We're just doing a couple more short rows and stitches. So we'll work back until we're down to the first peg with a short row on it and the middle peg with short rows on them. And our heel will be done. I'm down to 1 here on my middle peg and the first one on my first peg. So I can go ahead and snip the pink yarn here, leaving a tail to weave in. I'm coming up on the short row on this side, and what I like to do is on these short rows, I just like to go ahead and give them a regular knit stitch, even though this round is an E-wrap round. I just feel like it gives them a little more reinforcement. I finished working the body of the sock right after the heel. It's time to add a new color for the cuff. I'd like to go over the cuffs really quickly because this is the part where you can do stripes on your cuff if you like, or you could just do a solid cuff. On my cuffs, I did on my tester, I did just a regular switching the color, knitting in a regular 1x1 rib, and you can see the jogs, and you can also see that the stripes have a jagged quality because the yarn is showing from the other color up through the bottom and the top. And one thing about this kind of doing it this way is when you fold it down, if you had a foldable option, or if you were going to fold it, it's going to look the same inside as it does on the outside. And that is a good thing if you are planning to fold this down. So that's a good thing. And it also tends to be have a bit more spring back. It's not stretchier, but it springs back a little better when you stretch it. Now with my method, you can see that there's almost no jog here. This is my start and finish line. It looks pretty good. And when you're looking at the stripes themselves, even pulling them out, they look pretty solid. They look like pretty solid lines, pretty solid rows. You don't see a lot of peek through of the previous color. And they look pretty solid. Now, the problems with doing it this way is it's super stretchy, but it doesn't spring back as well. You can see that it's not fully going back. So you just want to kind of, give it a few tugs if that bothers you. The other thing is, if you were going to fold this down, it looks very different inside than it does on the outside. You can see that this does not look the same as the outside at all. So you're not going to want to do this on something that you're potentially going to fold down. And I'll show these side by side so you can see the difference again. Now this one was done on a 36 peg and this one was done on a 40, so that this doesn't make your stitches bigger. That's why this one looks bigger. But you can see how those stripes look different. I prefer this one. I think it just looks nicer. It looks neater. And yeah, I really like it. So I'm going to be showing you how to do this, but if you want to, you can just go ahead and switch the colors and do 1x1 this way. Okay, let's get started on our cuff. Finishing that last knit stitch on our start of the cuff. Now we're going to switch colors. We've done our 3 rows of pink, and now we're going to switch to green. So if you're going to switch colors here, you want to do the same method. Put a little loop onto your first peg, knit it off, and we'll want to bring the pink yarn into the loom so that it's not out in front of the pegs. And we'll do the same technique where we wrap that tail around twice and snug it down, and then tuck the tail down inside the sock to weave in later. And when we're doing color changes, a little trick, if you don't like the little blips that you sometimes see, is to just do the first row in knit. So instead of knit, purl, I'm just going to do my first green row in all knit around the loom. Here's the last stitch of our green color. We're going to go down in here, look for the last stitch of pink. You can see it's right there. There we go. The leg of that stitch. Bring it up, twist it, and put it back on the peg. Like that. Then we continue by knitting those two together. Get that little tail out of the way. And you can knit them off one at a time, which is how I usually like to do it. And then continue the pattern. Be knit, purl, knit, purl, and we do this for 2 more rounds. So we're going to end the green, and we're just going to lay it across the back of the pegs. We're going to pull our pink color up, bring it over the top of that tail to start knitting with the pink. And since we're starting a new color, we're just going to knit the first round instead of knit 1, purl 1. Finishing that round of knit in the new pink color. And now I'm going to do the same technique that I've done before. Go down inside, find the old color, stitch, pull it up, give it a twist, and put it back on that peg, that first peg. It's always tricky, and especially when you're sitting behind a camera, to do this without bumping the camera. There we go. And we're going to go ahead and take that, knit 2 together, and then do our 2 rows of rib. So we knit 1, purl, knit, purl, knit for 2 more rows in the pink. I finished knitting my final round in the green color, and it's time to bind off. So what I did is wrapped my tail around the loom 3 times. And go ahead and cut that off. And the bind off I'm going to use is a super stretchy bind off by Amanda Pratt, and she has the YouTube channel called Hypnotic Hysteria, and she's amazing. If you haven't watched any of her videos, you should definitely check them out. And if you haven't, I don't know how you missed them, because she's prolific and incredible. But the way I'm going to do it is going to be the opposite of how she does it. And I like the edge that it gives a little bit more, so I'm modifying it slightly. You can see along the edge here, it looks like a row of purl stitches. It looks really nice and tidy. It doesn't flare out. If you look on the inside, you have these bigger loops, but that doesn't bother me having them on the inside. The top looks neat. It looks like your little knit V's or crocheted V's. But I really like the way this looks when you do it in the opposite direction that she does. Or not direction, but I'll show you what I mean. So to do the bind off with my modification, you want to go ahead and skip the first peg, and then you want to come from the bottom of the next one, bring that stitch down, pull it all the way through, give it a little tug to tighten it up, come from the top of the peg that you skipped, and pull that yarn up and all the way out. And then give it a little tug. So our yarn is coming off of this first one, so we're going to skip the second one. We're going to come down from the bottom, pull the yarn down and all the way through. Give it a tiny tug. Come up from the top, go down, pull that yarn up and all the way through, and then tug it down. So you'll see you're starting to form these little V's in front of the stitches, and that kind of helps you know if you've done one. So wherever the V is, that's the peg you're coming off of. So you'll want to skip one. Now that will have two strands in front of it, one floating, one wrapped around. Go to the next one over, come from the bottom, scoop it down, pull the yarn down through that stitch, go back to the one you skipped, which now has the two strands in front of it, come out from the top, pull that all the way out, and snug it up. So we start at the bottom, pull our yarn down all the way out, go back to the one we skipped, come down from the top like a pearl, scoop it up, and pull it out. Skip one, pull the yarn down, go back to the one we skipped, and pull the yarn up. Now when you're doing this bind off, you'll think that you've done this last stitch, but basically every peg needs to have that have the yarn brought down through it and back up through it at least one time. So we need to skip this and go to the first peg, which is the first peg that we skipped in the bind off. I want to pull that down, go back to the one that we started our bind off with, and pull up. Now each one of these pegs will have two loops around the front of them. And you're ready to pull all of the pegs off of the loom, or all the stitches off of the pegs. Just go ahead and remove them all. Pull off these last stitches. Take the sock out of our loom. Again, because it's been stretched around that loom, you just want to give everything a little tug. Here's the end of there's our last stitch. So we want to go up to the stitch right ahead of that one. Find this little V. So you have this little bar, then you have two legs. You want to stab right down into that V behind the stitches. Pull that through. And there we've mimicked. This is where we went through, and we've mimicked that stitch. Then we just go ahead and weave in the ends in the back, and we have a seamless bind off. As you're looking through your sock, you might have some of these little poofy hearts that need a little bit of extra TLC. So just take your tapestry needle, and you just want to go in under one leg at a time and kind of give them a little fluff. Make that a little bit more poofy. This yarn can be a little bit tricky to work with because it takes a lot of effort to even just pull it at all through any kind of stitching. So I'm just going to go ahead and take it up. And I'm just going to weave it gently and carefully into some stitches along the toe, because this yarn really does, once you've got it in, it really kind of stays put. I'm going to just take it across the toe. Not making it too tight, so I'm not going to go back on itself. Just cut it off, and that's going to be really not very noticeable at all when you're wearing the sock. And when we turn it out, right along here is where I caught those in. You don't really see it, you don't really notice it, and it will stay in place. And it just gives you a little extra padding inside of there. I hope you enjoyed making your Alexis slipper socks. And I hope that anyone that you made them for will absolutely love them. Again, be creative, use your own colors, have fun with it. And if you enjoyed trying some of these new techniques, awesome. If you went with just the standard techniques for ribbing and stripes, you're still going to have an awesome sock. And yeah, I really love these socks. So enjoy them, and we'll see you later. Bye.